Hi, Colin. How are you doing in these strange and curious times?
I'm okay, Darren. I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, they are strange times, amazing times. I think it was Dickens, he said it was the best of times and worst of times, didn't he? I mean,
That's
that
right.
was then and it hasn't changed yet.
Curious that the tale of two cities.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking of you the other day because I came across an article where the Brazilian police had arrested a parrot for being a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read, I thought, well, that caught my attention, especially on the subject we're going into today. And when I read a bit further, what had happened was they were trying to bust a drug gang in a particular neighborhood. And they were having great difficulty doing it. When they finally got into this house, they found this parrot in Portuguese calling out, "Mother, the police! Mother, the police!" And so they considered that obviously the gang had trained it, so they considered it to be a part of the criminal activity and arrested it.
I can see the court case now, the lawyer offering a defense. He didn't know what he was doing, Your Honor, and so it will go on. Yeah, the madness of the times, eh?
Yes. So it's an amusing story, but it really touches on quite an important, mysterious area of life. And I think most people have had those kind of experiences, haven't they? Where the pet's knowing what they're thinking. I mean, there was a research done recently where they looked into this phenomena of pets who knew that their owners would be coming home from work or from a journey. And, they set up cameras with clocks so they knew the time and could see what was happening. And it turned out that the dog or cat would start responding and behaving and getting excited when they checked. It was actually the moment the person thought about, I'm going to go home now. So sometimes it would be 2 hours before the person actually arrived home that the pet was all excited, scratching at the door, waiting for them to come home. And so it really touches upon that whole amazing area of this interconnectedness between not just humans and animals and plants, but all life, really. And, even when you're thinking of, and I think most people have had this experience, and studies have shown that it's like 70% of people have had this experience, that you're thinking of someone and the phone rings and it's that person. Or conversely, you ring someone up and they go, I was expecting you to call. And it's this whole area of some kind of connection and web between all living things that we sometimes just get a little glimpse of, and it's amazing and it's very interesting, but then we sort of go back to normal life. And I think, looking into this area, it really opens up just how incredible and the possibilities that are inside of that for humans.
Yeah, the secret life of plants and animals, right? And again, they've been around on the planet for millions of years. And there's a harmony in nature. There's a beauty in nature. It's not all beautiful. There's a cruelty in nature too. It's not all, beauty and love and harmony. There's a cruelty there as well. But by and large, the fact that it goes on for so long, that the forests were in full flourish and for millions of years, and then the human comes on the scene, and we know what's happened in Brazil and so many countries. Brazil is one of the last places standing. That's why it's getting the attention, but other countries have been devastated by man's arrival. So that it's pretty obvious that our track record is not to arrive, learn, harmonize, appreciate, respect, but to arrive and devastate, not only, of course, animals and trees and plants, but other humans also. So this is our track record. So it's like, if we want to go into the territory of heightened sensitivity and developing finer human qualities, we've got to make a stand to not go that way and reapproach the natural worlds. And one of the most interesting ways is with this appreciation of the energy world side of
Yeah.
the organic life, because there's definitely, it's already been proven that all this, there's an electromagnetic side to life, but it's kind of like doesn't go very far along the track of relevance. So it's kind of like you hear a little scientific discovery there and a little research project over here, but it doesn't somehow integrate and have a relevance to our lives. So hopefully today we can bring a few little threads together and see why it is relevant.
And that was certainly the thing in the past, wasn't it? That people who lived in the forest and in the jungle, they considered themselves to be a part of that whole web of life and process. They didn't see themselves to be separated from it.
Yeah, I feel it's unfortunate. There was a guy called John Solomon Rary, and when I heard about this man, I really felt that it should be, his story should be told in school. You know, we should learn about. Everybody knows, young people know about this movie star and that singer, and we get their details on their lives. You know, who broke up with who and who remarried with who. But this guy should have really. What he did was he was the first horse whisperer, and
Right.
this is where the term came from. He was born in the early 1800s, and his father had this wild horse that broke his father's leg. And when the father was dragged inside, he was shouting out, "Go out and you know, that's it, go and kill this horse," because they'd been trying to tame it for some time. But when they went out, the horse and 12-year-old John Rary were kind of out of sight somewhere. And he shouted out, "Don't, you know, leave us alone for a few minutes." And when he came out, the horse was completely docile. And he became famous around the world at that time for being able to go into a stable with some terribly wild horse, terribly violent horse. And after about 30 minutes to an hour, come out and the horse was completely calm. And for a long time, it was a mystery. It was like almost magic. And he said that the three ingredients were patience, firmness, and kindness.
Right.
And eventually his technique became known, and there's a John Rary or a Rary technique today. And basically what he did was subdued the animal, but then he touched it tenderly all around the body so that it would learn to trust him and know that it was safe with him. And he went around the world demonstrating this in dramatic fashion, John Rary. And it's an amazing story, like that he could do that with imagine going into a barn and there's this wild horse and you have to calm it down in 30 minutes. So the main that he could do that, he must have really loved horses to start with, but he didn't find a technique. But what moves me about that story is what would be possible if we picked up on the thread of that and understood that there is a way to connect and cause a harmony with not just horses, but all organic life. And there are people working in this area. I know there's a team called the Trust Technique, and there's people who work in this area to develop trust with animals. But it demonstrates the gap between where we are and where we could be. When you know that somebody like John Rary, I never heard about in my education. So you just somehow stumble across it somewhere and you think, why didn't anybody tell me about this?
Yeah, and that's, you know, on one level we can, well, obviously it's a very, very practical, it's a very practical thing to have that approach, to be able to, you know, because you get good results from it. And, you know, we have this, we don't hear about it so much anymore, but you have this idea of a gardener having green thumbs. And those are the gardeners that have, you know, it might just be their little backyard garden, but they have a special connection with the earth and with the plants, and everything grows 10 times better. You know, somebody will have a plant that's poorly and they give it to the person and they look at it and then it flourishes and it comes back to life. And this is to do with this unseen world's connection between humans and the plants and the garden. And I think it was in the early 70s there when everybody was sort of trying communities of people of like mind getting together and really going back to trying to live in harmony with nature. There was a community in a place called Findhorn at the very top of Scotland. And, I've seen photos of the cabbages and pumpkins and things they grew, and they were literally giant size, because something about the energy of that land and the people tuning into that and integrating with that, everything flourished. So it wasn't just, it was practical, because what a great way to grow food when it almost it can't stop itself from growing in such an abundance. But it had that effect on the people as well. And when people visited it, family members or journalists, they were very quickly struck by the really strong energy, but also just that feeling of peace and patience and calmness, that there's that sense of a natural order of how things should be and proceed between humans and the natural worlds.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of serious mind shift, or a mindset shift. I was going to say a mindset shift, which is, when we look at a tree, or even if you research about a tree on the internet, or an animal or whatever, everything always seems to point to what we can get from this thing.
Yeah.
What we get from it. Even if a father's talking about a particular tree to his son, he's going to say, we use this tree, it's important because we use it for shadow and we get this fruit from it, and its wood is good for this. And this sort of mindset that everything is on the planet for us to take and use and consume. And obviously part of life has this aspect to it. But imagine something looking at you that way, looking at some greater, more intelligent creature, we can use his bones for that, and we can use his, head for that. I mean, it's sort of horrifying. So, the Maori, for example, I heard a tale once that the Maori, when they wanted to build a canoe, they would go into the forest and they would declare to the forest, they would ask, is there a tree here that would like to sacrifice itself, would be willing to sacrifice itself to be a canoe to service our community, our tribe? And they would actually wait until they got a sense, a signal coming from a particular tree that it was willing to do this. Then they would do a kind of reverence ceremony around the tree before cutting it down, of gratitude. And then the tree would be considered, as it came into the community and into service, it would be remembered that this tree gave its life to be part of our community. And that those kind of sentiments, if we don't have them, when we approach nature, when we approach these things, they pick up on the previous mindset, which is I'm going to use, I'm going to take, it's all from me. And in my experience, and from what I've heard from other people, and from what I've learned from different studies, the lives, the electrical lives, the soul, the finer intelligence of trees and plants will withdraw and pull back, just like we pull back from somebody who's dangerous, who's approaching. And so people are going to have less chance than ever of feeling anything. It's already difficult to feel radiations and things anyway, but if the tree is also pulling back its presence because it doesn't feel comfortable with your intention, with your radiation, then you've got double the problem, less chance still of feeling anything in nature.
I had an amazing experience like that, because I'd heard this idea about that trees had like a soul or an inner life, and if humans come by in a threatening kind of way, it retreats down into the ground. And it was summer, and must have been about 9 o'clock in the evening. It was dark by then, and there was a local park, and I thought I must go and try this out, because that's my nature. I hear interesting things, but I got to check it out for myself, try it for real. So I found a tree in the middle of the park, and I just went and stood. You know, I told it that I would want to spend some time with it and meant no harm, and sort of asking its permission, really. And so I just stood. It must have been for about 20 minutes. And, you know, when you're only about 19 or 20, it's hard to stand still for 20 minutes doing anything, particularly nothing. But I persevered with it, just with my back to the tree. And after about 20 minutes, I felt this energy and power surge into my body. And I felt like I was glued to the tree. And it wasn't just from the trunk. I could feel like that entire area of the tree just really quite highly energized. And I could feel that presence of something coming out. And then I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go. I just wanted to stay. It was so amazing. And it was so cleansing and energizing. So I stayed there for about another 20 minutes, and I had something else to do, so I had to go. So I reluctantly left, but I said to the tree, "Thank you, what an amazing experience." And therever after, even walking past that park, you could feel this connection. There'd been a connection made between me and that tree. And you think of trees, they sit there spring, summer, autumn, winter, in snow and blistering. So they can't go anywhere. They can't leave anywhere. And it's almost like the one continuous experience. And I really got this whole feeling that it was something special for the tree as well, to actually have a human come, and there's some kind of exchange that went on between it. And even now, 30 years later, and I live in another suburb, even just talking about it, I can feel like a soft sort of aching in my spine of remembering. It's like that connection is still there. Yeah. And many years later, because I love artwork. It tells you so much about history and what humans think and feel. And I was always caught by that painting. It's quite a famous painting of St. Francis of Assisi. It's called the Lecture to the Birds. But he's standing there, and there's all birds around him, absolutely still, but then squirrels and deer and like a whole range of animals. And after that experience, I understood that whatever that man was processing, whatever he felt and believed and was connected to, it was like all of nature felt at ease with that and could come closer into his presence. And that's why I love the story about the horse whisperer, because deep inside of that is that example where there's a direct connection made with that other life form, and then both have a trust and both can have the exchange because they need not fear harm or danger.
Yeah, there's a kind of sentiment level, because I think kindness and respect are like universal, are like a universal language. Wherever you turn up on the planet, somebody's going to treat you kindly or respectfully. It's not dependent on the language first, on speaking first. So there's the sentiment aspect, but there's also a kind of practical aspect, which is the frequency question. Because I remember an amazing story of a student of these studies here in Brazil some years ago. Claudia, if you're watching, I'm going to tell you a story now, because she had learned how to do that movement that we teach in the Ruby Mountain course, which is how to do certain movements to condition your electromagnetic field with a tone. And if you're looking, you can see a color change in the aura or the electromagnetic field because of these movements, which was the basis, of course, of sacred dance, to do certain movements to invoke in certain energies, like the spinning Sufi of the dervish dance. But anyway, she learned how to do the blue movement, and she loved this movement that would cause blue to turn up in your aura, or in her aura. And one day she came home from work, and there was a bird stuck in the house. Bird had kept flown in. And instead of the usual reaction of, what do I do and how do I, she just remembered the blue movement, and she went back into the kitchen and did the blue movement several times.
Wow.
and then try to maintain the connection, the state that it causes, because it causes a kind of state, a mental state, an emotional state of coolness and slowness and calm, which is we all want to be able to access these days. She was able to maintain it. She went into the room and the bird was sitting in a particular spot. And she approached the bird carefully and put out her hand, and the bird came onto her hand. She went over to the window and she put her hand at the window, but the bird didn't fly off. It stayed on her hand. And part of her is trying not to freak out, because she had never had this in her life before, that a bird would actually willingly sit on her hand. And she knew that she had a love for birds and nature and that type of thing, but the change of frequency allowed it, because if the bird had picked up on her agitation, it would have gotten agitated. It's similar to children, you know. Parents are often, it's a challenge for parents, because animals and pets, but also children, they pick up on the radiation of the adult or of the larger human. And so if the human's agitated or aggressive, there's a reaction, and it's not the desired reaction. So she had it happen again a few weeks later. The same thing happened. A bird came in, and the whole process repeated. So she knew that it was this blue, being able to go into blue frequency. And it's an interesting thing to consider, like walking into a forest, and instead of just walking to the forest as I am, to pause and change frequency. And another thing, to actually like let the forest know, like mentally transmit, announce that you're coming in. It might seem a strange idea, because of course trees don't know the English language or Portuguese language or whatever, but it's the sentiment, it's the intention that you would stop at the door rather than just crashing in, invading. We wouldn't like it if somebody just walked into our door and through our door and, you know, made themselves at home, right? But sometimes you've got a piece of forest that might be there 100 years without a person coming into it. And now humans would just walk in like, you know, this is my house. And it's quite interesting in terms of the presence of electrical forces in a certain area, to stop before going in and like project the fact that I would like to enter this space. And if you can wait, like you did in your story, it doesn't normally take 20 minutes. In my experience, it's only a minute or two. There's a feeling comes back from the forest of welcoming you and inviting you in. Just like if you stood at somebody's door and said, you know, hey, it's Colin, Darren, mind if I come in? There'll be a voice back, come on in, yes, come in. And then all the electrical forces stay present, and it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, very, very important point. And I mean, those blue movements, I still use those today. They're incredibly effective. And how to do that, and the lessons about those movements, that's all in Trail 1, isn't it, on the Ruby Mountain online course, if anybody's interested. Very simple, very straightforward, and pick it up in a few minutes and then just practice it. And I think that's a particularly useful one when going into nature, is to slow yourself down. And also what it does is that energy in our electrics, it has like a temperature. And so we tend to run more hot electrically and energy wise in our modern lifestyle. And that certainly cools everything down and slows everything right down. And you know, this, like you say, it might seem like a strange idea, but that's what I love about this work and this study. It's very, very practically based, because you can hear the theory of something and then go and try it out, check it out for yourself. I remember when I lived at home, and I've got two brothers, and I'd be out, you know, learning this stuff and applying it. I'd be out in the garden sensing flowers with my hand, and my mum had sweet corn growing in the garden, and I'd be sensing that. And sometimes I'd hear some giggling, and I'd look back to the house, and my younger brother had brought his friends over, and they were looking through the window laughing at what the weirdo brother was up to. But you see, also it's a very real thing. This chap, Dr. Cleve Baxter, in the 60s, he trained with the law enforcement to operate these polygraph machines, which is the lie detector. I mean, sure, you've all seen it in the movies. Where were you on the night of the 14th? And the person says an untruth, and the graph goes like that. It reacts to their nerves and their emotions. And he was at home one night, and he was a bit bored, and he had a plant there, and he thought, wonder what would happen if I hooked up the polygraph to the plant. So he did, and then he was amazed that on the printout, it had a similar reaction and vibration to if it had been hooked up to a human. And he thought, wow, this is interesting. And he thought, I wonder if I can make it react like, when a person's lying and the graph goes like that. So he thought, I'll take my hot coffee over to it and dip its leaf in there. And then he looked at the printout, no reaction, just that same sort of average rate. And then he just thought, what if I got a match and burnt one of its leaves? And then then the graph went like that. And so it had literally picked up his intention and thought he had not done anything physically. So it opened up a whole area of research that he ended up with a whole team of people working on it. And there were most curious things, like he did actually get an assistant to burn one of the leaves with a match. And, it had the predictable result. But this assistant went away on holiday, I think the story goes. And when he came back into the lab the following week, they happened to have the same plant hooked up to the polygraph, and it went like that as soon as the man entered the room. So, wow. So it knew, and it had memory, because it recognized the signal of this person a week later when they'd been away from the lab. So that's just one single plant. And, science has shown these days that plants in a forest, it's almost like a giant brain. They are literally all connected, or certain species of plants. There might be one here and one there, but under the ground through their roots and also electromagnetically, they are a connected community. So, you enter the forest, it's not just one tree, it's the whole forest. I mean, there are stories of North American Indian specialists who brilliant trackers and very, very sensitive, very much that idea of being integrated with the unseen worlds. But they could be following someone or tracking someone, and they could put their hand on a tree at the edge of a forest and know that that person had passed through that forest, because the forest registered it and memorized it, and they could tap into that, pick up on the frequency of just one person moving through a forest.
Well, yeah, they've proven that if a parasite is presented to a tree at one edge of a grove, for example, immediately the tree, there's a certain chemical that the tree will produce to resist this parasite, but the tree at the end of the grove will produce it immediately as well. Yeah. The leap that we're still trying to get through is, they're always trying to rush to describe these things chemically. There's a chemical reaction that causes this, because if it opens up the unseen worlds of the electrical forces and magnetic forces at play, it just is explosive, the implications, really. Because the transference that can happen in the unseen worlds, in these electrical worlds, is instantaneous. There was a reverend called Charles Morgan in the early part of last century, and he was a reverend in a Methodist church in Canada. And he had gone to the church early to set up things for his sermon, and he had a bit of time to spare, so he sat down in his study, and he fell asleep. And he had this dream of waves and darkness and people like shouting, and he woke up like feeling very sort of shaken up. And he went to sleep again, same thing happened again. He could hear in the dream people singing the song, protect us, Father, from the peril of the sea, was some sort of old hymn.
Mm.
And 3 times it happened, and he ended up going to the hymn board and adding this song on, this hymn on. When the congregation arrived and they sang this song, people witnessed him, like tears coming down his face. And of course, that was the days before telephone and all that sort of thing. It was only later it was discovered, it was April 1912, and the Titanic was sinking at exactly that same time.
Yeah.
So this man was obviously a very humane, sincere soul, you could say. And something in him, like the trees on either end of the boss, something in him picked up on this extremely strong signal that was beaconing out around the world at that time, and caused him to pick up on it and translate it in the way that he did, even though he wasn't sure exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It's this unseen connection that's so fascinating, and the implications of it are so fascinating.
Amazing. My mother worked in the local library for many years, and a new lady came to work there, and she'd come from Indonesia, and they got talking one day, and this new lady explained on the day of that giant tsunami that they had, I think it was on Boxing Day a few years ago, that her morning routine was she would always go down to the beach early in the morning, and there were lots of stray dogs there, and she loved dogs and animals, and she would take food for them. And on that morning, when she arrived at the beach, there were no dogs anywhere to be seen. And it really disturbed her, because, again, it wasn't just feeding the dogs. There had been some connection built. So she, to this day, I mean, now she knows why, but it was totally out of her normal patterns. She ran home and told her family something bad's going to happen from the sea. You better get up to the hill to higher ground. And sure enough, half an hour later, that tsunami rolled through, and it was recorded later that things like elephants living nearby in the jungle herded up to higher ground. It's this thing where everything in the natural worlds, and I'm sure the plants sense something as well, but they can't do much about it. Everything sensed what was coming and responded accordingly. And there are stories of other humans as well who picked up something was wrong, or just had an instinct to go to higher ground, but it was definitely the minority, not the majority. Most people go, what are you talking about? You're crazy, because the current view is that these things are a bit weird or unusual, and it's not really possible, but it is, because as in all these examples, there's a whole extraordinary dimension, this unseen dimension to life that connects all things. And as you say, I think as humans we've ended up disconnected from it, or not plugged into it, but history in the past and the stories of people who lived more integrated with nature says very clearly that we have that ability, we have that possibility to be plugged in.
I think one of the amazing areas that it's telling us that this exists, but it's still kind of like debated. And the problem is they wait for a machine that can measure exactly what's going on to say that this is what's happening. But what if the machine doesn't get invented in our lifetime? We're losing the chance to understand these fine wires and kind of natural Wi-Fi's in nature. And there's a turtle called Yoshi that they tracked from the beaches of Australia. And this turtle went underwater through to Angola, because they like to do this. They like to put tracking devices on everything,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Went through under the water to Angola and Africa and back again. And the journey was 22,000 miles.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So it's the longest recorded so far. But you can get maps of turtle, where they go from country to country. And it's the same with salmon. The salmon will start in fresh water, go downstream, go out into the sea, and then when they're going to have their fertility process, they'll come back up the stream to where they came from, the same stream, the same mate, the same spawning ground. And there's cases of these salmon going up waterfalls that are 100 meters high, upstream against the flow of the waterfall. So not only is it incredible that they navigate all this, but they navigate it with a intensity, with a focus that's unbelievable. And you know, when in the 70s and 80s, they used to always say, it would drive me crazy, they're using scent. You know, same with animals that find their way. I remember a case of a family that went to one side of America, lost the dog on the holiday, tried to find it, couldn't find it, had to go back to the other side of America. And 4 or 5 months later, the dog turned up. And there's a lot of cases like this. So it takes a little bit of.
Yeah.
But so there's some sort of wire there. There's some sort of unseen wire. And it's not scent. It's not, they're not smelling underwater or. Now they're starting to emit, they'll say things like, well, they're losing the electromagnetic fields of the planet. But that's kind of that's not enough also to find a specific location. So there's some sort of wire that can be almost like planted, or a frequency of a certain place. And like a homing device, it can find that particular frequency and follow that particular wire. It doesn't matter the distance. And even though this has been proven, like this fascination with twins, you know, they've done tests where they separate twins, put electrodes on the head, and one twin will put his hand into ice or something like this, some sort of little shock or something, and the nervous system of the other twin in the other room will catch it at exactly the same time, because they've got a permanent electrical wire. That's nothing to do with smells or scents.
Yeah.
But it's the whole implications of this territory that's incredible too, because what if you generated all this blue in your aura with that blue movement, and then you knew a friend that was very anxious, very upset, and you could deliberately send along that wire a certain energy to calm that person down. You know, the implications are huge, and it's kind of probably the basis of a lot of things like prayer and, you know, praying for people, that kind of thing. People instinctively know, and there have been documented cases of prayer causing more results with some in case studies than people that didn't receive the prayer. But it's the mechanism behind it that we still need to get a bit clearer about.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I was caught by that thing you just said about waiting for a machine to be invented, or, you know, not giving these things credence unless you can measure it in a lab. But, you know, what if what we are as a human being is the measuring equipment? Because I think that is actually the case. And you know, linking back to the parrot story at the start of this conversation, there's another famous parrot who lived in Germany with a family during the Second World War. And towards the end of the Second World War, when the Allied bombers would be coming over on a regular basis, bombing, this parrot would start squawking, danger, 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 you know, in German, Achtung, Achtung, whatever the German word is for it. And the family would know that it was time to go to the air raid shelter. But here's the really curious thing. They knew they had about 2 hours to get to the air raid shelter, because this parrot knew the bombers were coming 2 hours before they arrived. So at the speed a bomber flies at, they would have been around about 300 miles away. Because again, scientists tried to explain that, it could hear them coming, or it was picking up vibrations in the ground. But when you look at the details, it's absolutely impossible. There's this other ability to pick up. And once again, I think like the pets that knew their owners were coming home, you got a whole bomber squadron, all these men, and they've spent, you know, days researching exactly where the target is, looking on large maps. And, you know, you've seen the movies where they got ribbons with a pin from England to this particular place in Germany. So the mental intention from humans, that wire being sent out to where they're going, I think that's what the parrot was picking. Go, whoop, here they come again, and it would start warning the family, which again is amazing, because you've also got this, the parrot didn't have to do that, but it knew it was part of this family. You know, they were part of a small community, different kinds of species, but they lived together, and it wanted to protect them, wanted them to let them know danger was coming. And so, yeah, they not only knew it was coming, they had 2 hours to get organized.
That's amazing. You know, they're always looking for some physical thing to grab onto to explain these things, or chemical. They are admitting now that there's an electromagnetic side. Like, when I say they, I mean science, and they know now that birds have a type of mineral called magnetite that's in the beak, and sometimes found in the wings as well. And this picks up on electromagnetic patterns of the earth, and it's like a compass. If you had a compass, it would swing to the poles, the magnetic poles. And they're also admitting now that they believe that birds can see electromagnetic fields, which is interesting. I don't know how they found that out. But it's interesting that certain animals like birds and cats and fish are particularly a little bit more tuned in and sensitive. I think all animals have the sensitivity, but these have been recognized to be that more, maybe because they're more immediately reactive through history. So, you know, people have often had cats in the house because people who are sensitive sort of know that cats feel atmosphere changes and the presence of somebody coming, and somebody might be saying, here, putty, 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 but the cat's going to go to the person with the aura that's more pleasant. But there's an interesting thing, that magnetite, they've also found that we have in the bone of our nose.
Wow.
And one of the disconnects that we've had with the planet is we don't use our nose as much as we did in the past. You know, native peoples like the Inuit, you know, we call the Eskimo, and then the Maori used to kiss with the nose.
That's right.
In some cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we want to connect more intimately with something, we use our nose. But today our nose is pretty much kind of out of use, you know, out of service. There's a big sign, out of service, unless you throw some serious perfume or cooking in there. And yet that's the kind of part of most animals that's prominent. It's like this is the bit that plugs in and tunes into this electromagnetic field. And it's funny, when we talk about good instinct, they say, you know, he's got a good nose for that kind of thing.
That's right.
I mean, you and I have both got good noses for this kind of thing, just by the fact of it, right? But I thought that was really interesting, that the nose, because there's certain things you just can't brain out. You can't come logic first. It's getting back to intuition and instinct and sensitivity to step into these, into the practice of these types of things. It's one thing to have a good conversation about it, but like you said, your story of going out in the garden with your teenage brothers watching, that's the way to do it. Is next time in nature, try to switch on a finer sensitivity, try to use your instinct, try to actually use the sense of smell and open up the other senses. And suddenly you can be having an amazing experience rather than just plodding through thinking about something else, you know, as we tend to do.
Yeah, my granddad had an acute sense of smell, because, you know, also as we learn in the Ruby Mountain work, what the different parts of the human system are for and how they work, the nose is very important for the emotional connection.
Yeah.
And they went to a nightclub one night, and, you know, they had a smorgasbord dinner, and Granddad said, "Oh, I wouldn't touch that chicken, it's off." And everybody else said, "Ah, you silly old, you know, whatever." And they, the next day they had chronic, really bad food poisoning for the whole weekend, and Granddad didn't, because, you know, he picked up that something wasn't right. And of course, you know, that's another whole fascinating study, that the unseen worlds and energies, they have a color and they have a sound and they have a smell as well. My daughter has a very acute sense of smell electrically, and she would tell me that if she went into a class at college, she could tell what was going on there by the smell. So when they'd been doing maths, it had a certain smell, and when they'd been doing English, it had a certain smell, and when they'd been doing science, it had a certain smell. So, and the thing about that, it's built into the human system, and for some people, for some reason, it's quite acute at it naturally. But because it is built into the system, all of these things can be developed and increased in their sensitivity and the ability, because it's, it's just a very mundane example about my granddad, but it's very, very useful in having a greater awareness in what you're dealing with in life and whether something's harmful or beneficial.
Yeah, and giving space for a different type of picking up on things in a different way. Like we have this this lizard unique to New Zealand, don't we? The
Tuatara. Yeah.
And it still physically grows a third eye. It's got, optic cells and retina and all the bits, although they say it doesn't look through that eye. But there it is. And most animals do have a pineal gland. Mm-hmm. And what they found is when this Tuatara, if that third eye area was covered up with something, it's a horrible experiment to do, but they put nail polish over it just to, to test it, as we humans love to do, poking at things for our understanding. But what a curious result of that was it couldn't find its way home again. It got disorientated. Wow. So that points to the idea that these wires that come out, there is a kind of homing device. Like these days we have a Wi-Fi in our house, don't we? And it's the pineal gland. And so it makes you wonder about all that area. Why did some cultures and still do, they emphasize the area with a dot on the forehead. You've got the uraeus of the Egyptians showing a snake and a vulture coming out to represent silver and gold force out of that region. Yeah. And even organically, if you look at a human face, it's funny. You've got this kind of hierarchy of function, and then you've got this whole area that's like blank, of the forehead. And it makes you wonder again if we're meant to be plugged in, not just with the planet, which implies this nose, this extra dimension to the nose, I think the skin generally. But, I think one of the chaotic aspects of life today is that not only are we not connected into the planetary web of lines of force, but there was an urge in humans to connect to the universe, which is why the temples and pyramids throughout history have been lined to the stars and the galactic center and these places, because there's this urge to integrate with the universe. But unfortunately, along the way, we've lost this connection into the land and the earth, and we've lost the reality of connecting into the universe, because the word religion is religar in Latin and Portuguese, which means to reconnect. Yes. So the idea was to connect to something off world. And although people still feel this urge, the idea that there's an actual electrical connection, that there's a fine thread that could be developed with forces off the planet, is kind of, it's not really integrated reality anymore. And how do you do that if you're not even connecting to the flowers and trees in your own garden and down the local forest, right? So there's a whole lot to kind of rediscover and reintegrate with for us humans.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because normally when you say nature or the natural worlds, immediately we think of the planet and plants and trees and flowers and all the water cycle and all the rest of it. But of course, our planet is part of the solar system. Interesting, they call it a system, like the human system, the solar system. And there couldn't be any nature on Earth if it wasn't integrated with the processes of the solar system. And of course, the solar system is just one of billions of solar systems within the Milky Way. And then the Milky Way is one of billions of galaxies within the entire universe. So, and this was part of the great wisdom of the ancients. They had this understanding that the greater nature of the universe, you know, actually manifested and featured and expressed itself through organic life on Earth. I mean, that's why we have astrology. If you go back enough and dig into the roots of it, this is what it was to do with. It was to do with being integrated not just with the processes of Earth and its nature, but the processes of the solar system, you know, when you're talking about astrology, and then the star level beyond that. And, you know, it's fascinating that the Egyptians used the Scarab beetle as a symbol for resurrection and the afterlife. You know, it was a sun level connected entity. But I was floored a couple of years ago. I came across a new science discovery, and they had discovered that scarab beetles at night, they navigate by the stars to find their home and go to their mating grounds and all the rest of it. Now, you know, a scarab beetle's face down to the earth like that. I don't know what kind of eyes it has. It certainly doesn't have eyes like us. So it's not like it's looking up going, oh, now if I just turn left at that star and travel a couple more meters, I'll be home. Obviously, there's this process like you're talking about where they're feeling that there's wires of connection or flows of connections that they're feeling and responding to. And I just thought that was amazing, because there's another example of this incredible wisdom and intelligence when ancient peoples were not only just plugged into the natural worlds of this planet, but also the greater nature of the solar system and the galaxy, because what a perfect symbol to use. And I know they had other reasons. There's always many levels and layers within Egyptian symbology, but there's a very practical, you know, they see this process going on with an insect, but they see that also goes on with the human. And that's one of the amazing things, unusual things about the human, is that it even has those thoughts. I mean, you talk about the dog being lost and going hundreds of miles to find its way home. You know, you hear people talking, and I certainly feel it myself, just sometimes a strange kind of feeling that home is somewhere else, you know, that there's an urge to return home, to out there. And this, you know, this isn't just my feeling, it's quite a common thread throughout human history, and is behind things like religions, and as you say, the temples and stone circles and special arrangements put together almost like a giant radio set to boost that ability to connect into that bigger and larger nature of the universe.
Yeah. So yeah, fantastic subject to get into, and quite a few practical things along the way there. More, of course, on the Ruby Mountain course. You
Yes.
get demonstrations of the movements that produce effects in the aura, but there's already a few techniques in there or suggestions to how to approach nature and trees and so on. I feel like we need to wind it up about now,
Yeah.
because we've covered so much.
Yeah.
We need to have a talk soon on the stone circles you mentioned.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be
Yeah.
our next chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just one thing, Colin, just on this topic, in Trail 1 on Ruby Mountain, it's lesson 9, and you put together a really lovely little meditation with a whole series of video clips of the planet, this amazing blue planet seen from out in space. And there's some music and ideas of how to approach it, so that you can actually go through meditation and get a sense of taking time out to connect to the planet as an entire life form, which nature, that's the ultimate integration. All of that nature, trees, plants, birds, are all part of the nature and the life of the planet itself. So yeah, again, amazing little things that one can do to plug in and get a sense of that for oneself.
There's such a strong urge in people to connect, you know, all this modern phenomena of all the different medias for connecting with others. But people are feeling also there's a connect and drop, connect and break, connect and doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, something
and
very important.
Conversation is about, and this whole conversation is about connect with something that goes somewhere, because we're on this planet for a reason. The planet's part of the universe for a reason. Something's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that deep urge to connect is for sure to be directed into that realm. And then you've got healthy energies, you've got clean energies, you've got potent energies, you've got mysterious new energies. And it's all there waiting. It's all there waiting for us.
Yeah.
We just got to get past a bit of the toxic astral fog of the time and the distractions, get back to the simplicity. Because the joy of actually feeling the radiation of a tree or a plant, or feeling a connection, a different level of connection with an animal, these things are life-changing moments. So
yeah. And just before we go,
connected a little bit. We connected a bit, and hopefully there's a few people connecting in, watching this. And what have we forgot to say? Subscribe. We're trying to train ourselves to say subscribe, come along the Ruby Mountain journey with us.
Yeah, so if people have enjoyed this and find it interesting and they want to receive more videos as we do them, just click on the subscribe button and that will happen. Yeah,
that's it. Hey, Darren, thank you. Very good. Right. It feels like we kind of got on the edge of the conversation. It's a very deep area, but I think that's a great start.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you very much for your time. That's another great conversation. Really appreciate that. See you later.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.